Whether or not this Ukraine crisis turns into something much bigger, like a World War III scenario, now all of a sudden depends a lot more on Finland and Sweden, because Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a non-NATO member, has made Finland and Sweden reconsider joining NATO, and to that the Russian government is saying that we regard the Finnish government's commitment to a military non-alignment policy as an important factor in ensuring security and stability in Northern Europe. Finland's accession to NATO would have serious military and political repercussions. So that's a very tough statement from the Russian government. And I think what the world is watching for right now is that this whole conflict doesn't spill over into more countries. I know it already has with sanctions, but sanctions and military actions are not the same. And military action specifically is what the Russian government is threatening with here through Zakharova speaking on behalf of the Russian government and Putin. Take a look at this. She's saying that all OSCE member states in their national capacity, including Finland and Sweden, have reaffirmed the principles that the security of one country cannot be built at the expense of the security of others. She says that obviously the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, which is primarily a military alliance, as you will understand, would have serious military and political consequences, which would require our country to make response steps. So that's a very clear statement from the Russian government. Remember that the whole reason that they say they invaded Ukraine is that Ukraine wanted to join NATO. And in case you don't know, the reason that Russia is so allergic to bordering nations joining NATO is that NATO was specifically created to stop the expansion of the Russian Federation after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's why you have all of these nations that were part of the Soviet Union, like, oh, this is in Danish. Hang on 2 seconds. In English, there we go. So that's the reason you have all of these nations like Estonia and Latvia, Lithuania, bordering Russia or Belarus, like Poland as well. You have them in NATO right now because they have this sense of there could be a time where Russia would again try to expand and take over our countries. And of course, they have a very complicated history with Russia. So the Russian government is saying that that extends now to Finland and Sweden as well, that they don't want those countries to join NATO because, as you can tell here, Finland has a massive border with Russia, bordering more than 1,000 kilometers of Russian land. So they're saying we don't want you guys to join NATO because then potentially we could see US troops occupying the border region with Finland, and we don't want US troops that close to our border. This is where it gets a little complicated because Finland and Sweden are already kind of partners with NATO. Take a look at this. On Thursday, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg invited Sweden and Finland to attend a NATO virtual summit on the situation in and around Ukraine on Friday. On the same day, Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin said that Finland will be ready to join NATO if the issue of national security becomes acute. So Finland and Sweden are already NATO partners. They might not be members, but they have military alliances with NATO member nations. So that's the one reason that Putin doesn't want them to fully join NATO. But it's complicated because they already have these ties with NATO. And that's another reason that Putin wants to make sure that they don't fully join NATO as well. I was reminded of this speech that Putin gave some time ago before all of this with Ukraine. And he was talking about one of the biggest Russian tragedies over the last 100 years was how Lenin gave up Russian land to, you guessed it, Finland. After World War I, Lenin signed this treaty that essentially gave over Russian land in what is now known as Finland. In those areas, even today, there's still people that speaks Russian as their mother tongue. These people are of Russian descent, a lot of them, right? So, to the observant viewer, I'm sure that you can kind of see where this could be headed. Putin invaded eastern Ukraine because he said that Russians were living there, people speaking Russian, of Russian descent. He said that they were in danger and that he should come in and liberate them. Later on, he would invade all of Ukraine because he said that in the past it had belonged to Russia, so essentially now it belonged to Russia as well. So now you can begin to draw the parallels. If he could say that about Ukraine, he could essentially say the same thing about Finland. And that's why Finland and Sweden need to be concerned about this, because Putin could almost use the exact same excuse that he used in Ukraine to invade Finland and Sweden. And he could do it little by little. It would be the same thing. And since they aren't part of NATO, the West will be almost as ineffective in helping out Finland and Sweden if it was to happen. That's why I think we need to take this very seriously. But there is still a difference between Ukraine and Finland and Sweden. That being, of course, that Finland and Sweden are partners with NATO. They have these military alliances, and they actually right now have troops of NATO inside both Finland and Sweden. So if Putin ended up deciding to attack or do some kind of conflict with these countries, it would look much more devastating to the whole world, because then we would have a conflict between Russia and all of NATO. As if you attack one NATO country, you attack all of them. And that goes for NATO troops as well, NATO troops in Finland and Sweden. So they might not be member nations of NATO, but that doesn't deter a full-scale war if Putin was to attack Finland. So keep that in mind. As tragic as it is with Ukraine right now and all of the news we're seeing, at least it's not a full-scale World War III up until this point, and that's what we need to prevent. In the spirit of that, the Finnish foreign minister, Pekka Haavisto, is saying that we've heard all of this before, talking about Russia threatening with military action against Finland if they join NATO. He said that we don't think it calls for a military threat. Should Finland be NATO's external border, it rather means that Russia would certainly take that into account in its own defense planning. I don't see anything new as such. So he's essentially saying that, look, guys, we think that this goes more to how Russia will respond in their own country. It certainly doesn't sound that way from the way that Russia's foreign minister is speaking about this. Zakharova is talking about this when we've just seen what they are doing in Ukraine. It certainly doesn't sound that way, but I understand why he wants to downplay the whole situation. And remember that Finland, by the way, is also part of the EU. And the EU, I don't know if you know this, but they actually also have military agreements within certain countries as well. The EU is not that strong as a military. Even if you combine all of the European EU forces, they wouldn't be able to match the Russian forces, almost only on the fact that Russia is mobilized in one country, united, and the EU it would be very divided if it came to a conflict like this. So the question really becomes, how far do we think that Putin is willing to go? And some people in the news are saying that he just completely lost his mind. He's just doing this without any kind of plan, while other people are saying that he has a strategy. There's a reason for him doing this. The main argument, of course, being that he doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. But keep in mind that all of those other countries bordering Russia are part of NATO. So it might actually be more the fact that he would want to maintain some kind of control of Ukraine, that if they joined NATO, he would lose almost all control. Whereas now he still has the possibility of maybe putting a puppet in office that would be more pro-Russia and wouldn't want the nation to join NATO. Either way, if you zoom out for a second, what this does mean is that these international military organizations like NATO are growing, and This is just speculation, but I think something we should all be very watchful for is when an organization like NATO is going to grow this rapidly. Whoever joins NATO will be militarily effectively under the control of the US. The US controls NATO, they have the biggest military force, they contribute the most, they call the shots within NATO, and I'm certainly not against the US in any way in this case, but I am against us being manipulated into being part of a global military force that's controlled by one country. Remember over the last 5 years when Trump was president, how so many US politicians would go on TV news channels and scream about how they wanted a conflict or even a full-blown war with Russia. Now, why would they do something like that? It seems completely insane to want for. One thing's for sure, whether we have an escalated war with Russia or kind of a confined crisis with Ukraine and Russia, more nations will join NATO and become under the protection of the wing of NATO, which is run by the US with a very firm hand. And when you think about it, it's almost the only thing that kind of makes sense, that if you want the US to become in control of a massive global military force, what you need to do is corner Russia, make it erratic, make it attack an otherwise peaceful nation like Ukraine, and then make all of the rest of the West scared of Russia, and then they join one by one, they join NATO. I'm not saying that's what's happening, because that would be a conspiracy theory, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But I'm saying it's either that or that we're just run by completely incompetent people. Tomorrow I have a really interesting video for you guys, so make sure to subscribe to the channel and check it out tomorrow on the channel. It's going to be very important for this whole crisis with Ukraine and how it affects all of us potentially. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate every single one of you.